The face was different this time. You were sure of it. A new name, a different city, a laugh you hadn't heard before. And you told yourself this one was nothing like the others. You'd grown, you'd healed, you'd learned what to look for. And for a while, it seemed like you were right until it didn't. Until you found yourself in the exact same place you swore you'd never return to, waiting, wondering, shrinking, hurting in a way that felt painfully familiar. And that familiarity is exactly what we need to talk about. Because they'll tell you it's just your taste in people, that you're drawn to a certain type, and you need to break that habit. They'll tell you to make a list of green flags, to set clearer boundaries, to love yourself first, to stop romanticizing people who aren't good for you. They package it neatly and call it advice. And none of it works. You know it doesn't work because you've tried all of it, and still you ended up here again. So let's stop pretending the problem is your taste. Think about the one who was always somewhere else, even when they were right in front of you. You could feel their physical presence and still feel completely unreachable to them, like sending messages into a void and watching the red receipts pile up. And you didn't leave. You softened yourself. You asked for less. You told yourself that this was just how they expressed love, that underneath the distance was someone worth waiting for, that your patience would eventually be rewarded with the presence you were starving for. It wasn't. And when it ended, you didn't just lose them. You lost months of yourself. Months spent rearranging your needs to fit around someone who never once rearranged anything for you. Think about the one who made you feel like the most important person in any room. Not for long, but long enough. They had a way of seeing you that felt rare, like they understood something about you that you hadn't even fully understood about yourself. And then one day, the warmth began to cool, slowly at first, then all at once, and you became a detective of your own relationship, searching for the moment you said the wrong thing, the moment you became too much, the moment you ruined something that had felt so close to what you'd always wanted. You found nothing, because there was nothing to find. But that didn't stop you from building a case against yourself anyway. Think about the one who disappeared, not dramatically, not with a fight you could point to and say that's where it broke. They just stopped. Messages slowed, then stopped. Plans were made, then quietly forgotten. And one day you realized you were the only one still showing up, still reaching, still trying to keep something alive that the other person had already let go of without telling you. And in the silence that followed, you did what most people do. You turned it inward. You made their absence mean something about your worth. You decided that if someone could leave that easily, you must not have been worth staying for. None of this was coincidence. None of this was fate. None of this was simply your type. Carl Jung didn't believe in accidents. He believed that what keeps appearing in your external world is a precise reflection of what remains unresolved in your internal one. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Not fate, not bad luck, not just the way things go for people like you. A pattern, specific, traceable, running quietly beneath every choice you believed you were making freely. Because here is what no one tells you. You are not attracting these people. You are recognizing them. Something deep inside you responds to their presence, not because they are right for you, but because they feel familiar. Because the way they make you feel matches something you learned about love long before you had the language to question it. That pull you keep mistaking for passion, that electricity you keep calling chemistry, that feeling of finally when you meet someone who turns out to be exactly like the last one. That is not love finding you. That is a wound recognizing itself in another person. And until you understand where that wound began and what it has been trying to tell you this whole time, you will keep walking through the same door, a different name on it every time, the same room waiting on the other side. The pattern does not end by choosing better people. It ends by becoming someone who no longer needs to recreate the wound to feel at home. And that is exactly where we are going next. Now, here is what nobody wants to hear. Understanding the pattern changes nothing, not yet. You can feel every word of this. You can share it, screenshot it, send it to the person who broke your heart last month. And tomorrow, you will wake up and walk straight back into the same dynamic with someone new. Because insight without integration is just another way of staying comfortable with the wound. And comfort with the wound is exactly what keeps the pattern alive. Jung knew this. That's why he didn't just name the unconscious. unconscious. He said, you have to descend into it. You have to go to the places inside yourself that you have been carefully, expertly, unconsciously avoiding your entire life. So, let's go there now. Go back further than your last relationship, further than the one that broke you open 3 years ago, further than the first time someone made you feel like too much or not enough. Go back to the house you grew up in, to the people who were supposed to love you before you even knew what love was, and ask yourself one question. Was their love consistent? Not perfect, consistent, because consistency is the foundation of everything. When a child receives consistent love, they learn that closeness is safe, that they don't have to perform to be accepted, that the people who matter will still be there tomorrow. And that knowledge becomes the baseline, the frequency their nervous system calibrates to, the thing they recognize as home. But when love was inconsistent, when warmth came and went without warning, when affection had conditions attached that a child couldn't fully understand, when the people who were supposed to be there sometimes weren't, something different gets calibrated, something that follows that child into every relationship they will ever have. And here is the part that changes everything. That child learns to call inconsistency love, not because they are broken, because that is all they had to learn from. And the nervous system doesn't judge its lessons. It just records them, files them away as the definition of what love feels like, what intimacy costs, how close you're allowed to get before it gets taken away. And then that child grows up, and they meet someone emotionally unavailable, and something inside them lights up, not because unavailability is good for them, because unavailability is familiar, because their nervous system says, I know this feeling, I know how to navigate this, I know how to survive inside this dynamic. And survival reads as safety even when it is destroying you slowly from the inside. That is why you stayed longer than you should have. Not weakness, familiarity. That is why you chased the version of them from the beginning, not desperation. Your nervous system trying one more time to resolve what was never resolved in that first house. To finally get the consistent love that was promised and then withheld. To prove to some part of yourself that you are worth staying for. That is why the ones who were stable felt wrong. Not because they were wrong, because stable felt unfamiliar. And unfamiliar registers in a nervous system like yours, not as safety, but as absence. As something missing. As that thing you keep calling lack of chemistry. There was no lack of chemistry. There was lack of chaos. And your nervous system had learned to confuse chaos with love. This is not your fault. You did not choose this map. You did not sit down as a child and decide that pain would feel like home. It was drawn for you by people who were themselves following maps that were drawn for them, by generations of unhealed wounds passing themselves forward because nobody knew how to stop them. But you are here, right now, listening to this. And that means something, because the map can be redrawn. Jung called this process individuation, the most difficult journey a human being can take. Not because the destination is far, but because it requires you to do the one thing your entire psychology has been built to avoid. It requires you to feel what you have never allowed yourself to feel, not think about, not talk about, not post about at midnight when the loneliness gets loud. Feel the grief of the love that was never consistent, the anger at having learned to call pain home, the sadness for every version of yourself that kept returning to the same wound hoping this time would be different. That feeling is not weakness. That feeling is the beginning of the end of the pattern. And what comes after that feeling is something most people in this cycle have never experienced. What it actually feels like to be free of it. That is exactly where we are going next. Most people never get here, not because they aren't capable, because they are afraid of what getting here requires. They stay at the level of understanding. They collect the insight. They learn the vocabulary, shadow self, attachment style, repetition compulsion. They can explain the pattern to anyone who will listen, and they return to it anyway, because understanding without feeling is just the wound wearing a more sophisticated disguise. Jung called this intellectualization, the mind's most elegant defense mechanism, the ability to discuss your pain in such precise and articulate terms that it feels like you are doing the work when you are actually doing everything possible to avoid it. So, let's talk about the actual work. Not the work that looks good, not the work that gets shared online, the work that happens in the dark. in the silence, in the moments when there is no one watching and no one to perform healing for. The work that asks you to sit with yourself in a way that most people spend their entire lives running from. Jung called it making the unconscious conscious. But what does that actually mean in a life? In a real human life, with a job and a phone and 17 ways to distract yourself from anything that feels uncomfortable. It means stopping, really stopping, not meditating for 10 minutes in the morning before the noise begins again. Stopping long enough to ask yourself the questions you have been too afraid to ask. What do I actually feel right now? Not what do I think about what I feel. Not how do I explain what I feel. What do I feel in my body right now, in this moment? Because the wound doesn't live in your thoughts. It lives in your body, in the tightening in your chest when someone takes too long to respond, in the way your breath changes when a person you love seems distant, in the surge of anxiety that hits when something good is happening and some part of you is already waiting for it to be taken away. Your body has been keeping score this entire time, and it has been trying to tell you something that your mind keeps interrupting, that you are still waiting, still braced, still operating from the assumption that love is temporary and presence is conditional, and closeness is something that can be revoked without warning at any moment. And from that assumption, you have been making every decision, every choice, every move toward or away from people, without knowing it, without choosing it, automatically, the way you breathe. So the work begins with one thing: noticing, not fixing, not immediately rewriting the story, just noticing. When does your body brace? When does the familiar pull appear? When do you feel that electricity that you now know is not chemistry, but recognition? When do you start performing, shrinking, chasing, shutting down? Just notice, without judgment, without immediately trying to make it stop. Because the pattern doesn't dissolve when you fight it. It dissolves when you finally see it clearly enough to understand what it was always trying to protect. And what was it protecting? A child who needed love to be consistent and learned to survive when it wasn't? A child who adapted with breathtaking intelligence to an environment they had no power to change? A child who decided somewhere along the way that if they could just be the right version of themselves, the love would finally stay. That child is still inside you, not as a metaphor, as a living part of your psychology that never got the message that things are different now, that you are no longer in that house, that you no longer need to earn what should have always been freely given. And that child needs something that no relationship has ever been able to provide, no matter how hard you tried to find it in other people, no matter how many times you returned to the familiar wound, hoping this time the ending would be different. That child needs you. Not a partner, not a person who finally chooses you the way you always wanted to be chosen. You, the adult you, the one who is here right now listening to this and feeling something shift in a place that doesn't have a name. Jung said, the most terrifying thing a human being can do is to fully accept themselves. Not the curated self, not the self that performs and achieves and makes everything look fine. The full self, the wounded parts, the frightened parts, the parts that learned to call chaos home and have been paying the price ever since. Because when you accept those parts completely, something remarkable happens. They stop running the show. Not immediately, not all at once, but slowly. The grip loosens. The pull toward the familiar wound begins to weaken. The person who would have sent you into a spiral 6 months ago becomes just a person. Someone you can see clearly instead of through the distorted lens of everything you needed them to be. And for the first time, you begin to feel something you may have never fully felt before. The difference between familiarity and love. And once you feel that difference, everything changes. Because what comes next is not another relationship, not another attempt to find the right person. What comes next is something you have never actually tried before. Choosing yourself first, not as a concept, as a daily practice, as the foundation everything else gets built on. And that is exactly where we are going next. This is where it ends, not with a revelation, not with a list of things to do differently next time, not with a morning routine or a journaling prompt or a boundary you write down and then quietly abandon 3 weeks later. It ends with something far more difficult and far more permanent than any of that. It ends with a decision, not the kind of decision you make with your mind, the kind you make with your entire life, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but shows up in the small moments, In the moment you feel that familiar pull towards someone and you pause instead of chase. In the moment you notice your body bracing and you breathe into it instead of performing around it. In the moment someone treats you as less than you are, and instead of shrinking to accommodate them, you simply become very still and very clear. That stillness, that clarity, that is what individuation actually looks like from the inside. Not dramatic, not linear, not the before and after that gets shared online. A quiet and irreversible shift in the relationship you have with yourself. A shift that changes everything around you without you having to force anything to change. Because here is what happens when you do the real work. When you grieve what was never given. When you sit with the child inside you who learned to call chaos home and you say, I see you. I know what you survived. I know why you learned what you learned, and I am not leaving. Something settles. Not all at once, but permanently. Like a foundation being laid beneath everything you thought you already knew about yourself. And from that foundation, you begin to make different choices. Not because you are trying harder, because you are seeing more clearly, because the wound is no longer running the decision. You are. And from that place, the people you attract begin to change. Not because you manifested better options, because you are no longer recognizable to the people who needed your wound to be open in order to feel comfortable around you. Because emotionally unavailable people require someone who will chase them. And when you stop chasing, not because you are withholding, but because you genuinely no longer need what they were offering, the dynamic has nowhere to go. They move on, and you let them. Without the grief that used to follow you for months afterward, because the grief was never really about them. It was about everything they represented. Every time you almost got the love you needed and watched it disappear. Every time you were so close and then found yourself back at the beginning. The grief was for the original wound. And when the wound heals, the grief finally has somewhere to go. And the people who are capable of real consistency, real presence, real love that doesn't require you to earn it or chase it or shrink yourself to deserve it. Those people begin to feel possible in a way they never did before. Not boring, not lacking in chemistry, possible. Safe in the way that safety is supposed to feel. Not like absence of feeling, but like presence of something you didn't know you were allowed to have. Jung said the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation requires two people who have done enough of their own work to actually be present for each other. Not performing, not surviving, present. And you cannot get there by finding the right person. You can only get there by becoming someone who no longer needs the wrong one. That is the assignment, not the relationships you have had, not the people who broke you open, not the patterns that have followed you from house to house and heart to heart. The assignment is this moment, this decision, this quiet and irreversible choice to stop outsourcing your healing to people who were only ever meant to reveal where the healing needed to happen. They weren't accidents, none of them. Not the one who went cold, not the one who left without a word. Not the one who made you feel like you were never quite enough. They were all pointing at the same thing, the same place inside you that has been waiting not for the right person, but for you. You are the closure you have been searching for. You are the consistency you never received. You are the love that was always missing. And the moment you stop looking for it in people who cannot give it and start building it in the only place it was ever going to last, you will understand something that cannot be explained in words. You will understand why it had to happen exactly the way it did. Every single time. Not fate, not bad luck. The assignment, and you just completed it.